thank you so much for coming along. This is an incredible turnout. We've got 3 great speakers. Jamie, Fedi, Tash. Special shout out to Tash, by the way, who's doing this on a holiday in Edinburgh, so I really appreciate the commitment. What better way to spend your holiday than speaking to awesome people about security?
3 years.
And 3 years. There's questions tonight. If you want to use slido.com and use that code. I know sometimes people are nervous about asking questions, or they don't think of questions at the time. So we're going to do that. We'll try and do a Q&A panel at the end if we have time. We'll see how we get on. But you're welcome to send stuff on there, and I'll be keeping an eye on it. Please try and keep it clean, because I've seen a few in the past that have not been so nice. We were going to announce the new Cyber Scotland Connect website tonight, but sadly Harry's not here to do it, so we'll do that next time. Just some house rules. Look, this is an open and honest forum, harassment-free, for you to enjoy yourself and hear some great speakers about our industry. It's sales-free and it's judgment-free, so we value you being here and we value your feedback, but please look after each other. So thank you very much. So first up, Jamie.
I've got a mic.
Yeah, you need both because that's doing the online stuff.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Right, I think it's that. Cool. So, as Stu said, my name's Jamie. I'm at the Hairy J on Twitter, and I'm going to be discussing bug bounties today. I made these slides basically today. It's my first time running the talk. It's going to be terrible, but it won't be as bad as the end of Game of Thrones. So,
Don't spoil it.
fine. Hope you all voted today. If you've not voted, you can probably leave now. You'll see nothing of good content in this talk. Hope you did vote. I don't care what you vote, besides probably my t-shirt gives away who I don't want you to vote for. But moving on to the actual talk. So originally this talk started out, it was like a concise version of my lit review for my master's dissertation. You'll see traces of academic writing throughout and some quite flowery words. Unfortunately, getting access to bug bounty data is very difficult and no one wants to do it. So it kind of stopped me taking this further. However, hopefully some people here who might be in a position to take this forward do. So like any good student, you have to do critical evaluation to get marks. An easy way to do that is to compare and contrast. So we're going to start off really easily by talking about bugs, like kind of the term. So historically the term bug is used to do flaws in programs, but that includes like imperfections, inadvertent functionality, and security weaknesses. However, traditionally, bug tracking systems have been used to track bugs, and it's only been recently the emergence of like bug bounties, which only consider the security weaknesses for the bugs. They don't care about inadvertent functionality or imperfections. The similarities and differences across these two comparable systems provide some interesting insight into the problems discovering and disclosing bugs. Slide number 2. Right, so one similarity is they're both intrinsically motivated. If you're reporting bugs and it's not your job, you're intrinsically motivated to kind of better the system that you're doing it, be it for financial reward or not. Oh, for God's sake. One way these reports are received is, excluding incentives, is to use automatic reporting. This comes in many forms. One of the ones is the checkbox. When you get an open proprietary software, you just have to click it. Mostly we'll decline that. However, bug bounties are more focused on web and infrastructure, which don't really have this ability to kind of just send them away to an automatic report. You can tell I've just not revised this at all. So the ease at which reports can be submitted using these tools is like a double-edged sword, because users who report using automatic don't have the knowledge that a developer would want, and this causes report to reduce. I've honestly written too much that I can't see, and I can't see my. Oh, there it's there. Right, I can't see that either. This double-edged sword because you don't have the information or the insight to provide greater details. But meanwhile, bug bounties require the reporter to produce a submission with intricate detail required with some knowledge of the process which resulted in the weakness, all while expecting the same, if not greater, knowledge in the recipient, because obviously they've got to then solve the vulnerability when it comes to it. An obvious difference is transparency. Bug trackers are technically public, available in forums or mailing lists, while bug bounty reports are usually kept secret unless an agreement about the public disclosure is met. This privacy, there for quite an obvious reason, you don't want vulnerabilities out and everybody can see them, creates an interesting disparity between the two systems. Bug trackers welcome and openly promote duplication to validate and give credence to the bug in question. However, in bug bounties, duplication is basically a heartbreaking rejection, which I've faced many times. This fear of duplication may lead to less detailed reports, which I believe is yet a small yet significant factor in the first problem that I'm going to talk about today, which is the information mismatch. So information mismatch comes from economic theory, basically the difference between what developers consider the most helpful and what users provide. Thankfully, there's a handy-dandy ISO, which covers most of what you're supposed to put in a vulnerability report. This includes, as seen here, location, steps to reproduction, a proof of concept with some media, so a flash video or some pictures, impact and severity, the type of vulnerability, so using CWEs, possible root cause, disclosure plans, and then data discovery. Studies show that the inclusion of this information leads to bugs being solved sooner, and then there's not mentioned, but in ISO, but stuff to put in is support and references. It's just not in the ISO despite being revised ones. Potential countermeasures, if you can go a step further, help the triager and also the company that are going to do the solving the vulnerability. They can get countermeasures faster. Good manners, which cost nothing, but yet people are not very nice when they write reports. And also Grammarly Premium, which I just have to say is fucking ace. But it is so expensive, I can't afford it anymore as a student, which is a shame. And then you've got, despite all this stuff and being available and publicly available, this is an ISO you can actually get for free. You get what's in the right hand column, which is people that give you void details, like no information. You'll also get beg bounties, which is a term which comes from people finding believed bugs, but then just begging to be financially rewarded despite no impact, no worth. This is when you've got like a hash value, which is only used for a little bit, and it's only used to kind of store not PII information, and they'll still ask for, oh, it's MD5, I want a bug bounty for that, and happens more often than not. Blackmail is a more extreme version of this beg bounty system. Remember Uber, with a 10k max reward, and someone got all the financial information or all the 57 million records or whatever it was, they used the bug bounty system to try and get more money off them, and they got 100 grand, I think it was. And then finally, foreign languages, which is a kind of sad state of affairs, but generally reports are not written in English or discarded. This is unfortunate due to the high technical skills required to triage bugs. It would be infeasible to hire someone for all major languages, especially as triagers for Microsoft's vulnerability disclosure policy. When it started was in the, despite all the salary and benefits of Silicon Valley and Microsoft, was in the worst 10 jobs in STEM. So the fact reports can't be written for foreign languages hurts the overall community, which now for bug bounties is worldwide, as you can see on this map. I've highlighted 3 countries, India, Egypt and Argentina, they'll come into it later. Both major platforms, so HackerOne and BugCrowd, say they have over about 300,000 accounts, with one saying over 30% of their users are from India alone. This seems to be a trend overall. A lot of developing economies are adopting, or a lot of people are doing bug bounties to supplement a wage because you'll get paid kind of Western wages rather than what they get. This is kind of true in Argentina, where you get about 40.6 times the median wage for a software engineer for doing bug bounties. However, this kind of comes, this concentration on money earned by individuals is not taken into the reality of bug bounties. The average payout of a bug bounty is about $600. However, only 1,000 hackers have earned more than 5k, according to this one study. And then so that's 5k for overall, despite 14.4% of people spending over 48 hours a week on this. I've tried to live on $5 a year. That's been a shunt. Doesn't work out well. And then only 100 hackers on this platform have earned more than 100 grand, which would equate to about 100 bounties at this average. And then 2 hackers have somehow earned over $1 million. However, what this doesn't tell you, despite it look really good, and you'll probably go home and make an account, is that 96.5% have never received a bounty despite signing up for the system. And you don't get it from all the market material, and it's quite a scary fact. It kind of shows a perception of like well-off hackers that you see on Twitter and driving nice blue cars, surviving and thriving off a cybersecurity gig economy isn't as glamorous as it's made out to be. A kind of glimmer of hope in this kind of sense is that only 6% of the large companies in the world from the Forbes 2000 have actually adopted. If more adopt, then potentially there'll be enough to satisfy the kind of growth of bug bounties, because at the moment there's another problem that's coming up, and is the increasing popularity of bug bounties actually a good thing, and does more eyes mean the better? Unfortunately, no, it doesn't. Too many participants lead to an insurmountable number of reports, either if you're doing it through a triager, like one of the big bug crowd or HackerOne, or else if you're doing it yourself, the number of duplicates a bulk of these insurmountable reports will be duplicates, and try to resolve these reports, provide long-lasting solutions to be implemented into your SDLC will take up considerable time, and this overhead is going to keep on growing if the number of people doing bug bounties keeps on growing. On the other hand, too few participants will lead to narrow coverage of vulnerabilities, and a worst case, a false sense of security, because if you're not receiving reports, you might think, oh, my product's safe, but that's a lie. Therefore, programs have to manage their community and make sure they're getting the coverage they believe they are getting. This is complicated by the heterogeneity of hackers, which is a fancy word in academia for diversity. Some of us are good at one type of vulnerability, while some of us are reasonably good at all of them. And as already mentioned, some hacking on the side, some might be hacking on the side, while some might be doing bug bounties as a full-time job. So trying to balance who's taking part in your program can be quite hard to overall manage when you don't really see them or interact with them in person. Nevertheless, one study identified there's 3 types of bug bounty participants, and this is the kind of diagram of it. It analysed the data from 82 bug bounty programs and over 2,500 contributors, and identified 3 different archetypes of people who participate. You get a project specific, you've got a project non-specific, and then you've got a less active, and that's kind of self-explanatory. Specific, they will do one program or do like 1 or 2. Non-specific, they'll do a lot, and then less active are just people who, 96.5% or in around there. You can see the distributions on this group, which is that's from the survey, and it's no surprise that from the 96.5% is mostly concentrated in this less active corner. Well, they may be responsible, which this corner might also be responsible for the overarching issue of credibility in bug bounties. This is one of the major kind of things that people bring up when they're getting bug bounties, is like, how can we understand that the people trying to hack us are doing it for good? It's this group down here, because they might be the people that do beg bounties and blackmail and all that. Moving towards the other corners, the credibility and fame and most likely a nice bank balance is gained. The dynamics and the differences between these 2 poles are quite fascinating. Project-specific hunters spend more considerable time. They'll spend about a week on average to find a bug, while implying the use of different methodologies. So they'll actually have, they're the more Renaissance men kind of people, and then you'll have, they mostly focus on a program which they actually like, if they use the person's products, or they like the company they used to work for them, or something like that. However, the more extrinsically focused or motivated, so than the non-specific counterparts. So they're more focused on wanting fame and getting a reward out of it, and a kind of sense of feeling good, and the company cares about them. And this kind of leads them to more flirt with the dark side when it comes to it and sell vulnerabilities in the black market. Because they're going to find your more deeper down vulnerabilities. They're not going to find all the ones that project specific do. They're going to find the ones that will get you the good bounties. A factor which compels them is the bounty sum. Some feel when they're spending a week on a bug bounty that they want the good money. So if you don't give them, they're potentially going to sell it for more. And one survey respondent said that the feeling their work was appreciated by the vendor was also a significant factor. And a way that this could be alleviated is if you incorporate the bug bounty hunter into your resolution of the bug. If they can see how you solved it, they ask you to then test it or whatnot and maybe get a bit more or get some swag, then they're more likely not to go sell bug bounties and be quite happy. And then obviously comparing it to non-specific hunters, they spend less time attempting to find a bug on a program, about half a day. They're known to use a small palette of methodologies, usually only one. They focus on a specific type of vulnerability, which is why they're called sometimes vulnerability specific hunters. Over a large range of programs with the goal is mostly just to get money. And the goal of financial reward leads us on our second dabble in economic theory, which is rich coming from me because I've got no money. And it's going into the St. Petersburg paradox, or kind of like sort of. So St. Peter's paradox is also another thing when it comes to economics. It's when you only take into account the expected value, and it leads you to do irrational thinking. And the way this kind of happens in bug bounties is a new program comes available, so you jump on it straight away. And the problem this leads to is there's a big windfall. As you can see, the top one is GitHub and the bottom one is Slack. When they started, you can see there's a big spike and then it just dies. This mostly comes from people being focused on money. So this is your non-specific hunters, while maybe your other ones there are the project specific or just people who take ages to write reports. So multiple factors such as the organisation, the payout and the hype which builds up this paradox. If they're lucky, they'll submit one or two of the non-specific ones, and then they'll exhaust their methodology. That's all they're good for. They'll do what they'll try and find, and then they won't come back to this, and they'll just move on. Believing that portfolio diversification outweighs the return of investment for adopting a new methodology. That was Grammarly. This can be seen as a consequence of gig economy and cybersecurity, and the downside of heterogeneity of hunters, which is amplified by poor bug bounty management, which doesn't retain participations or go beyond, oh, we're just going to give you a simple bug bounty. There's a lot more which they can do to keep this number up. So what is the solution? Well, no one really knows. There's no major study in bug bounties at all, which is why I wanted to study it. And academia makes a few stabs, but they haven't been implemented or experimented on yet. Obviously, it'd be quite risky to experiment on the bug bounty system because you could ruin your reputation and it's working with security. The big bug bounty ecosystems don't actually advertise the best way to run a program. They do dabble in efficiency. However, obviously it's their job to make sure that you're not doing it the best way possible so then they can make money, so therefore they don't. That's the Sharkey principle. It's another economic theory. So researchers kind of suggest that incentivize scope creep, which where the scope increases over time. You have a new subdomain go out or a new bit of code. If you're a company that puts a lot of code out every day, this isn't much, but if you're doing it kind of just in sections and uploading it, that can game the St. Petersburg paradox. You make double bounty weekends or 1.5, or you get more money if you do it in this specific area. This sounds great. However, for an existing large organisation, you don't want to limit what's being tested. If you're a big conglomerate and you're only getting tested a wee tiny bit, you're not getting your money back really. You want everything to be tested. Private programs also exist, basically where you get invited if you're someone who's credible on the list, so you're project specific and you're non-project specific. This is where you control your participants, and it also sounds quite appealing. However, you'd want the cream of the crop, which costs you a pretty penny, and they'll be in high demand. There is multiple private programs. Bug Crowd's quite bad. I think the 65% of Bug Crowd is all private programs. And it's not the best for a small organisation because you're paying the people who do get over 100 grand a year, and you have to pay them a premium for coming to the programme. But there is hope. There may be a solution, but no one's discovered it or discussed it in the open yet. This is all my references. It's kind of cut off. APA format if you want to know. You also see Zhao pop up a couple of times, so he is number 6 and number 8 there. This guy was a PhD candidate at Penn State. He's the only person to have got a PhD kind of in bug bounties. He did economic theory, hence why I know a little bit because I read it, I deciphered it. That's what I've done because it was hard to read. He now works at Snapchat, running the bug bounty program, which I'm told is held in high regard because of the money they pay out, as well as all how he's implemented basically his PhD at the company. That is really what. Oh, and what's next? Well, this is where I was going to put my sales pitch for my to help me out doing my dissertation survey. However, I can't take this forward now because I never got my data. That said, there is massive potential for further academic research on bug bounties. I don't think any of the big platforms are going to help you. The ones that are free seem to help the most researchers, but if they're not free, then you're not getting the full incentivization of it. That kind of wraps up my rambling on bug bounties. I went a little bit over. Hopefully you've been left with some ongoing problems to ponder on. I've been Jamie. Thanks for having me. Reading off a script. No, it's fine.
Thank you. Brilliant. We're going to do Q&A at the end unless anyone's got any kind of burning desire to.
Just the one question. Do you have any idea of the distribution of clients that apply for bug bounties? Did they ever share industries or size or?
They do a little bit, yeah. It's mostly focused on like tech startups and people that give out products. I do know that some emerging platforms are moving to educational and industrial and stuff like that. And obviously now there's that EU public sector one where everything's open source code, which now does like a kind of free bug bounty. That's the main thing when it comes to it. You can read their reports, so if I go back to my references, we'll leave that up. The HackerOne and BugCrowd do a report every year, and they've got just basically a marketing pitch, but there's some data in there that's quite interesting.
Okay. So one here, Jamie, have you ever been paid a bounty?
I don't think I've got an account on any of the bug bounties, so I'm just speaking at my arse. But I'm an academic, so that's what I get paid for.
A couple of minutes while we change for Philly. Bug bounties is really new stuff. I've been doing it for a few years, but it's such a new part of security that I'm not sure we have the data yet to be able to do a lot of that stuff. I was meant to say at the start, which is probably the wrong time to say, is that there's a fire exit over there. If it never happens, just jump that way.
But this is not dog specific. It's not because I'm talking.
Thank you, Jamie.
That's not bad.
Go over here. Give me 2 minutes.
I need to do a couple of minutes of riffing here. Just
Keep it going. Keep it going. Show this up. Show this up.
I don't know the URL for this. So Faye's going to talk, and then we'll do a little 10-minute break. You can finish up a pizza and the drinks. Thank you to Mackenzie, as always, for putting this on. They pay for everything, and they run these things. It's easy for us. And then we'll have Tash after that, and then we'll cook some beers tomorrow.
All right.
Good, you might go.
Hello, hello. Can this?
Good, that'll be on there.
Can you hear me?
No.
No.
It's for the mic, that mic's for that.
Ah. Technology. Yeah, I'm good. All right. So this talk really was created not for this audience, so bear with me. This is a talk that I gave about a month ago, almost like a keynote for non-technical kind of senior directors type stuff. So it's aimed a little bit as a rant of some of the things that I'm noticing that are not particularly healthy that are not particularly cool, and what we should be doing as leaders, directors, managers, team leaders, whatever, to try to fix some of it. So it's very philosophical. It's a little bit pedantic. Apologies for that. And in this crowd, I really wanted to give it, mainly because Stu missed it and he wanted me to repeat it so he could see it, which is fine by me. But also just almost like a little bit of a discussion. So it'd be good to make this a little bit more interactive. Maybe not during the talk, maybe in the panel, or during the talk. I don't really care. So just raise your hands, right? But it's a very preachy talk, so I do apologize for that. And the title of the talk was why we do what we do, an exploration that an industry that is quickly losing its soul. And it came from a little bit of a dark place when I wrote this one. This was one about why are we as a little company, so we're Quorum Cyber, why are we as a little company allowed to exist if security's been around for a while and there's all these big, massive terms and companies out there? Why is there still room for something? I think it has to do with the fact that we just care about a thing, a mission, a why, and a lot of the industry doesn't, and that's why I think we're losing a lot of people. So it's a whole bunch of apologies about who I'm talking to. So the talk is split into three things. It's what I see when I look out there, what we try to do differently. So I'm going to analyze this as an example. It's not a pitch. It's more of a how did we do it, and why did we think we got some things right and some things wrong, and then an invitation, a call to action for all of us. So what do I see when I look out? And really, I kind of already gave you the hint at this at the beginning, but what I see is not cool. I see an industry, and I'm not always sure if it's the industry or it's the times that we're in, right? But I coexist in an intersection between the two. And I see a really dire image of how we're treating our people. I see a really dire image of how we're feeling as individuals in this industry and in general. Our industry in particular is bad. We are selling smoke. We're selling too much black magic. You wouldn't understand it. Just trust me for it and pay me a lot of money for it. We are hosting terrible multi-million-pound events and giving away giveaways that mean absolutely nothing in some sort of misguided mission to represent this really special industry that is really cool and really sexy, and that everybody else is beneath us, particularly devs. If you're a dev, you're nowhere near good as well as us. This, and that's obviously an axiom, that's true. But other than that, the rest is, the rest isn't. And I honestly believe that this is what's causing a lot of the frustrations that I'm seeing in the people that we hire, and the people that I talk to, and my peers and colleagues, and the people above us. We're not doing a great job of creating something of value. And I think we need to be better. What I see when I look up there is a big, massive emptiness of leaders that are representing and taking us forward in a way that you would like to emulate. And it makes it very lonely to do that, right? But I think this is more than just a cybersecurity issue. I think cybersecurity is a good example of it because we're full of shit for most of it. But I think this is a generational issue. I think there's a problem here where we don't know where to place our beliefs in. Like, I think we're, as an animal, as a species, naturally gifted to want to believe in something and go for it. That's why religion did so well for centuries, right? We want to believe in something and totally blindly put our passion to it and go for it. And I think everything that we're doing today in our work-life balance is lacking that depth. It's all very shallow, but we don't really establish true connections. We don't really get to buy into an ideal and commit to it like a crusade. And to a certain degree, we are a social animal that is used to do that. And I don't think we have it. So I think what got me to start Quorum Cyber was that idea. Like, I wanted to create a vehicle where I could grab that energy that we're not placing anywhere right now, and that it's kind of dwindling, and we're spending in the wrong place, either by doing stupid stuff that is negative and not good for us, or sometimes super good stuff like being ultra healthy or ultra fit, which I think is an obsession because we're lacking that other thing to put that energy into. So we pick this random thing that is fitness and we go for it. But if we could capture that, if we can nurture that, and if we can place it and focus it where we can add value in society, I think we're onto something, right? So that was the idea of, and I told you this was pedantic, but that was kind of the idea of some of the drivers that got me to doing a startup. It was, what if we are able to create together that vehicle? So the key for me there was a particular thing, right? So I think most people that set out to build stuff fail because of the lack of these two things, which is drive and intentionality. Drive being the ability to persevere in the face of adventure. So you have an obstacle, you want to just go through it and run through it, as opposed to just diverting, going left. And intentionality, making sure that where you want to get to is where you're investing your energy to get to. Because a lot of people say, I want to be there, but then everything they do actually takes them further away. And I think if you connect those two, and you create that vehicle, and you invite people to join you in that, you actually have a shot of making something worth it. So what did we do differently? How did I apply this in practice? And the reality is, I have spent, and I spent still today, a lot of time with this. I love this problem. And I love this problem because I think it's more interesting than a tech. It's almost like hacking away at a startup. How can you grab a system that's been repeated 100 times and do it differently so that it's better, fun, or interesting? So I embarked in this kind of really introspective mission as I was starting this whole thing and going, well, what are the things that define me, and what are these things, these fundamental principles that we believe are right? And I spent a heck of a lot of time, and we came up with a mission statement, if you're a Jerry Maguire type oriented person, that was do the right thing. And we used this still as a sentence, right, in the company. But it was complete bullshit. And the reason it was bullshit, it was because it was incredibly self-obsessed sentence. This sentence doesn't mean anything. You can't measure it. It means different things for different people. And it wasn't something that represented any externality or anything out there. It was just a thing that I believed in, that I wanted people to believe in. So it was value in it, but it was not really a thing. So I went back to source, right? So what got me starting in thinking these ways? And some of you might recognize this diagram. This is a diagram right by this guy, Simon Sinek. And the idea of the diagram is his theory, and it's probably the most watched, if not the second most watched TED Talk ever, companies that do better are the companies that start with why. So if you communicate from the why outwards, you will do better than if you communicate from the what inwards. Example he gives here is computers, right? So Dell Computers will sell you cheap computers that empower the geeks that think differently. We do that by creating incredible tools that allow you to change your world. Do you want to have a computer for me? And the message totally flips, right? So I've always been obsessed with that talk because he hits something so paramountly basic that is incredible. I even quote him in this because his quote is incredible. As a company, we spent a lot of time defining what is a good customer. Because a good customer for us is not somebody that needs what we do, it's actually somebody that believes what we believe. And in that case, the journey that we go in with that customer is a lot better. And again, we're just quoting this guy, right? So this is all the theory that we use as the basis for what we did. But it just resonates incredibly good. So how do I move from that original slide where everybody's frustrated and anxious and misrepresented and we're kind of surrounded with bubblegum stuff that doesn't mean anything, to this, which is where I think all of us want to live in and want to be part of by creating a company, right? So we spent a lot of time figuring out what were the motivations that actually drove us. And what drove me in particular was my childhood, my background. When I was growing up, I was a small little Argentinian. So thank you for mentioning Argentina, Jane. Well done. Totally agree. There's something in the milk there, though, because some of the greatest hackers do come from there, and myself. So I grew up there as a kid that didn't like football in a football-obsessed country. I was short and fat and Jewish. Not great image. So I didn't have lots of friends. I was bullied to shit throughout my entire childhood. And that defined me, right? I found the strength to fight that and the strength to go through that, but a lot of people don't, especially today, and less so today. So to me, it became incredibly important that the company that we were trying to build was a company that ultimately was trying to fight bullies. And this is bullies from the industry, as well as the bullies that we actually help our companies protect against, which is the black people of the internet that are the red teamers, the black teamers. We exist as a company that helps there to protect customers from getting breaches. We help those that cannot help themselves. And this became the true calling of us. This became the nurture of us. And this is what our customers now buy. And I guess if you go down that chain, that's the why. The how we do it is by creating simple products, and the what we do is totally transient. The what we do might change. We do cybersecurity, we do incident response, we do pen testing, but that's not the important part. The important part is the why. So what was the invitation? And this is the kind of the quick last part. The first one was find your bully. And in our case, the thing that drove us to do what we do was that bully, the actual bullies, right? We have companies that are being besieged by attackers and hackers, and they can protect themselves. This is aimed for people not like RBS, not like those. This is not the people that can afford a security team. Our focus is people that can't, because we want to protect those that cannot protect themselves. But I think that mission statement, or that idea, became important to the teams and became important to my customers. And the reason why, it's because it played well together. My invitation here for everybody in the room and that meeting, and in this one as well, as the next leaders, the current leaders, and the next startups in the room, that's how people connect to. They don't connect to a product. They don't connect to a pricing structure. They don't connect to a feature. They don't connect to how you do better than the other product. Nobody gives a shit about that, guys. They really don't. What they connect to is to why. They connect to why are you doing this as opposed to not doing something else? Why should I believe in you? And that's equally true for your employees, for your teams, for your customers, and for your competition. This wins over any pricing structure or discount you can possibly give. The stop, ask, call to action was stop blaming. This industry is terrible. And I quoted, and when I gave this properly and actually had a structure as opposed to my rambling, I quoted you, Stu, and Harry, because I think the two of you are doing something incredible in how you're actively voicing that idea of we need to be better to each other, we need to be kinder to each other, we need to keep talking, we need to creating these forums where we can come in and join and talk about everything that is wrong and not productive, and actually focus on the good stuff and the good people that are out there and the good ideas, because too many of us are living in that first slide where we're not enjoying our lives, we're not enjoying our jobs, we're not enjoying our projects, and that's not how we get to progress to the next level, which is what we wanted to do. So thank you very much. I kept it super quick. Tried to go into a panel. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Any questions while we're here? Just want to check on Slido. Any questions just now? I was going to say for the end, but we're good for time. So.
The title of the Tech Talk. So that's Simon Sinek and Start With Why, I think is the name of the talk. And there's a book as well that you should read by him, Leaders Eat Last, which is fantastic. Anyone else? Right, we'll show the panel. Thank you.
Cool, thank you much. Let's take 10-15 minutes, get some more pizza and beer, and then we'll come back to that. Yeah. Awesome, thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much. Totally was ranting.
No. It's good to different mine. That belongs to the.
Okay. Look, when I do it, it's naturally.
now?
Yeah, 57, solid. I can plug in other ways.
You want to take a seat? We'll get going in a couple of seconds.
Why not? Okay. Is that all good? Yep.
Okay, we'll get going. All the noisy bunch in the back. It's always the happy days. Watch your right, watch your right. Right, noisy ones in the back. Oi! Thank you. You're welcome to ask you. I live in the photo box. They talk about card hunting and cooking as well. So over to Tash. Thank you.
Hi, so this talk started from a conversation not too dissimilar like this one that I had about 6 years ago, where my boss at the time kind of threw out this kind of crazy idea based on something I was talking about. And a little while after I was like, maybe I could do that. So I'm gonna take you on a bit of a journey about what it is I'm talking about. I'm gonna talk about threat modeling. I'm gonna talk about this idea of predictive or precognitive threat modeling, somewhat inspired by the Minority Report. And then I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how you can contribute to the project as well. So my name's Tash. I work at Photobox. I work with Stu. I lead the AppSec program. I also do some cloud stuff. I do any security engineering tech stuff. I work for Dennis. So some of you may know Dennis Cruz. Basically, he gets a really random idea, a tech idea, and he goes, "You." And I'm like, "Oh God." So I do threat modeling, cloud security stuff, architecture stuff, all of this stuff. Things I want to tell you about that I'm working on at the moment. One is philanthropy and technology, specifically philanthropy and security. And it's this idea about how we can use some of the security skill sets we have in completely random areas. So the thing that I'm looking at in the moment is how can I use threat modeling practices to help with poaching in Africa. So you have limited resources as a gamekeeper, so how can you use the approach of threat modeling to scope out the resource and make sure you use it in the right places? Because honestly, technologies like drones are super cool, but not really scalable and maintainable in the outback. So that's stuff I'm working on at the moment. If it's something that interests you, come talk to me. I also am on the review board for DevSecCon. You should totally submit. And I do help run OWASP WEA, which is the Women in AppSec group in London. So if you're ever in London and you want to speak at OWASP on AppSec, come let me know. All right, so let's get started. So precognitive threat modeling. It's this idea, and I remember speaking to my manager all this time ago in financial services about threat modeling and how cool it is, and I'm going to bring you on the journey as to what threat modeling is in a second. And I kind of presented this, hey, you can come up with threats and you work as a team and you bring your engineers on a journey and you all think about threats. And he was like, what if you could just pull in some tech and then some threats would appear, very like Minority Report-esque screen. Somewhat inspired by an MIT project where they actually built this screen and he'd seen it and he was like, we should totally build that. And I was like, sure, Neil, whatever. And then a little while later, it just clicked for me. So I want to talk about that. So first of all, what is threat modeling? And why do we care? So this is the Veracode report that was released a couple of weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago, that most of you will remember. And there were some really interesting stats in here, but what's kind of highlighted for me was how many of these stats were things that really we should be able to foresee. Like a lot of the stuff that came out in this breach report weren't the number of attacks via 0 days. They weren't kind of crazy nation state driven. I mean, there are those types of attacks, but they aren't the predominant ones. And it made me think, well, how do we get better as security people in kind of finding and predicting these things before they happen so we can help protect against them, so that our stats don't make up so many, don't have so many things about phishing in them or bad configuration or social engineering attacks, things like that. So what is threat modeling? This is Tim. Tim is my husband. Tim is actually here with me. We are genuinely on holiday. We're just mega nerds. No, so I came to Edinburgh a couple of weeks ago for B-Side Scotland and loved it. And we're actually on our way to Isla Harris, so we thought we would stop off in Edinburgh. And then Stu was like, beer, pizza. And I was like, I'm in. He was like, also, you should talk. And I was like, I'm still in. I'm a massive nerd, and I love talking about threat modeling. This is Tim. Tim wanted to propose to me while we were on holiday in South Africa. And he had this big idea, and he got really excited about it. And as we got to Heathrow Airport, he realized that he had the ring on him, and he was with me. And he, in this moment, was like, oh God, what can go wrong? And he thought, well, they're gonna make me propose to her in the middle of security at Heathrow Airport, and like there's gonna be all these people, and it's gonna go so badly, and we're just gonna set the buzzers off. And he kind of panicked, and then he thought, okay, well, what can I do about it? Now, Tim, knowing me very well, knew that I'm incredibly competitive. So he looked at me, and we're just coming up to the security queues, and he says, I'll race you. And in that moment, I'm like, you're on. And I just walk away from him kind of as fast, but also as undescript as possible, so that I can get to another queue. And I'm thinking, okay, who's in front of me in the queue? Who's going to slow me down? Are there people with prams? Are there people with these belts and big shoes and loads of bags? And I'm thinking, what can go wrong, and how do I get to the other side? But in Tim's head, he's thought, okay, what can go wrong? What can I do about it? Well, she's gone that way. And it's like, right, I did a good job. And he got through. And what he was doing in that moment is he was threat modeling. Now, he doesn't know what threat modeling is, but it's a really natural process that we do every day. And what I do with my teams is I build a framework, and I use frameworks that are existing to kind of build this, I suppose, more formal process of applying your natural thinking to your software engineering skills or your software engineering life cycle. So Tim threat modeled naturally. He did eventually propose in South Africa after a somewhat contentious moment where in Cape Town, Table Mountain was closed, and he really wanted to propose on top of Table Mountain, and he had a minor freak out about high winds, which to me felt overly dramatic, and now I know why. When they finally opened Table Mountain, there was no time to put trainers on. I went up there in flip-flops. And I'm like really grumpy and freezing cold, and he's like, will you marry me? And I'm like, what? But all that went really well. So threat modeling is something we do naturally. Okay, so there's some frameworks that I use when I threat model with teams, and it's important to bring you on this journey because that'll help you to understand why we do predictive threat modeling. So there's a whole load out there, but there's 4 main questions, and this is based on a Microsoft process by a guy called Adam Shostak, who wrote a really, actually very good book on threat modeling. And it's, what am I building? What can go wrong? What can I do about it? And did I do a good job? And I think what was interesting for me when I think back to Tim going through airport security and thinking, okay, what am I doing? I need to get through airport security without having to randomly propose. What can go wrong? What can I do about it? And did I do a good job? So again, it's such a natural process. So when I think about doing threat modeling, the problem for me is that whilst you have these great frameworks and you have these questions to follow, it can be overly complex, and it can be so different depending on who you're with or what company you work for or what your experience is. So you end up with a whole load of different types of diagrams. And I subscribe to this theory that there's no wrong way to diagram when you do a threat model, which is actually apparently incredibly contentious. I personally don't care what shape the box is, as long as the team really understands what's happening. But again, apparently that's really annoying to some people. And I kind of get that if you come from a very solid architecture background. And for a while I worked within an architecture team, and the way I did diagrams, again, very much pissed people off. But there's so many different ways to diagram. And then when you think about actually capturing the threats, it can get even more complex. And you've got loads of different tools, loads of different ways to capture them. And for me, spreadsheets, especially tables, is kind of where data goes to die. I kind of feel like when you put information in a spreadsheet, that's it. You've put it in there and you've captured it and you've ticked a box somewhere, but really, data goes to die in spreadsheets. So I started to think about, okay, well, I've got these cool frameworks and people are really interested in finding threat models, and when we're in the room, and I bring the whole engineering team on the journey, right? That whole squad is in there when we threat model their service, because for them, they've got to be a part of it. But then we have a great time, we think of some threats, everyone feels really empowered in that moment, but then the data's gone, it's lost because we capture it, we write it down, and it's almost as bad as when you get a pen test report and you just chuck it at a team and then you leave it. So I needed to think about, okay, well, I've got this problem with all this data. How do I harness it in a way where every time I do a threat model, I'm not also doing the same threat model over and over for different teams, but I'm also making the data more easily accessible and easier to work with. So I started thinking about this precognitive threat hunting idea and how I capture loads of data and make use of it. And the first problem I had was I captured too much data, and it ended up very much like the scene in Harry Potter where there's just letters everywhere. And effectively, all that data said the same thing because I ended up pulling in CVEs and pen test reports and all those things, and it was just too much. So I'm going to talk you through a couple of, I guess, POCs and things that I tried to try and answer this problem. So the first one was around automation. So it's this idea of, okay, well, I want to capture all this threat info, and I want to get to a point where, as an engineer, you can say, hey, I want to work with PostgreSQL databases. And then I want to be able to have a system that says, hey, here are some threats that you need to think about when you design that system. The idea being that rather than using threat modeling after initial design is there, and I'm using it to refine the initial design, I'm using threat modeling to influence the technical choices and kind of influence and guide the design. It scales a little bit better because I don't have to be in every design review session or every ideation session. But it also gives engineers the autonomy to really consider and understand the security implications of the choices they're making. So attempt one. Attempt one was my threat modeling pyramid scheme. Some of you may have heard me refer to it as the AppSec pyramid scheme. This is the idea that as one single security person, I do not scale. So I'm going to train every security champion that I have, or every engineer I come across, do threat modeling for me. What actually happened was I kind of just left them with this threat modeling ball and said, go for it. And they kind of felt a bit overwhelmed with the responsibility and the threats and everything that they had to do. It just didn't, I still ended up with the same problem, which was I had way more threat models happening, which was ace, but I still had these huge kind of buildups of data that was never looked at again. And I effectively had even more spreadsheets where even more data went to die. So attempt number two, I got to this point where I was like, okay, I'm going to have to build something. So I kind of came up with this PostgreSQL database. I used Python, Flask, I used Heroku, and I effectively built this web app whereby teams could enter in the threats and the details of the threats they were capturing. And I was getting them to add information like the tech stack, so was it what language it was, so all these kind of different identifiers for the threat itself. And then the idea was teams could then go to the same database and they could say, hey, I'm going to use this tag, and it would bring back the threats that are accurate. What actually happened was I built the How to Hack Company X database. So I effectively got all of our threats and all of our vulnerabilities, and I collated them in a way where not only is it like looking at your risk register, but I actually said, hey, you want to get this technology type, or you want to go after this data? This is exactly the vulnerability you need. So I and my CISO at the time even called it the How to Hack database, and I was like, okay, I really did do that. But my problem was that I wanted to start sanitizing the data because I wanted it to be reusable between teams. I didn't want to shame Team A when Team B looked for threats for their service and saw, oh, Team A have got all these problems. And I wanted to get to a point where, not unlike the attack in the MITRE framework, I wanted to be able to open source this so companies, other groups could see, okay, well, this is what I need to consider. The problem you have with CVEs or attacking MITRE is you don't actually really get a good idea of how prolific is this, or how common is this? What threats or vulnerabilities do I actually need to care about versus just knowing everything that's possible? So I kind of took a step back from this and thought, all I'm really doing is overwhelming people with data, and it's not always the most accurate or the most relevant data. So how do I actually approach this problem? So I joined Photobox. And I joined Photobox Group Security about 6 months ago, and they do something really weird. They use Jira as a graph database. So basically, does everyone know what Jira is? It's like a workflow management tool. It's just a workflow management tool, right? It's for your Kanban boards or sprint boards where you can see all the stuff you've got to do, what's in progress, and what's done. That's how most people use it. So they use it as a graph database. So what that means is they have risk workflows. So they have things like, so this is actually a risk workflow. And rather than your to-do, doing, done, they've got risks that go through this flow of, okay, the risk has to be validated and assessed and then allocated for fix or accepted. And it's how they track their acceptance too. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of interesting. It's a bit weird, but it's interesting. So then you look at your tickets, and what they've got is they use links super heavily. And they use labels, and then they've got these workflows you can see, and you've got your timestamps, all of that stuff. So I look at it a bit closer and I'm like, okay, maybe I can use their database. This is interesting. So maybe I can start to capture my threats in this way. So I'm like, okay, I could do this, and then I don't have to become a DBA, because to be honest, trying to maintain that Postgres database was like the least fun thing of my role. So we started to take it a bit further, and around the same time, Dennis, our CISO, built what we call GSBot. And this actually open source now is OSBot, I believe, an OWASP security bot. And effectively, it takes all that data in Jira, all of those tickets, pumps it into an Elk stack, and then it queries that Elk stack and creates graphs. So what happens is you have so much data in Jira, because now we're capturing all these threats, all of these risks, along with everything that everyone's doing, and it's just not easily navigatable, right? Even with search queries in Jira, it's still not the most exciting platform to query things with. So the idea was you could go to Slack and you could say, hey, show me all the threats related to X. Right, this is pretty cool. So going back to our tickets, what I can start to do now is capture threats instead. I'm like, okay, but when I generated one of the tickets, I ended up with quite a lot of data, and I'm like, it's not quite what I wanted, but it's getting closer. So what I've got is I've got an asset, I've got a whole load of threats. But what I can see, which is a bit different, is I can start to see where my fixes are, and then who's actually using those fixes. So what I mean is I might give a recommendation for a type of fix, and then what tickets are actually on people's backlog to fix that stuff. And I can start to see what fixes fix the most stuff, if you're still following me. I've said that word a lot of times today. But effectively, you can start to prioritize that a bit more, and it got a bit more interesting. And I realized to do this properly, I need a taxonomy, right? I need to make sure that everyone's speaking the same language, because when I'm using threats and vulnerabilities and risks and fixes and so on, it gets hugely confusing. And to really make the use of this system and to make it truly predictive, I need a taxonomy. So this is from Synopsys. And we started to use this to really make sure we were capturing the right data. And some of the things that I thought was really interesting to call out was the differences between threats and vulnerabilities and what were effectively defects or bugs, because we all know those companies that say that's not a bug, it's a feature. And I wanted to be a bit more clear with our engineers what that actually meant. So then I started to make it a bit more simple, because that one was still incredibly complex. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm bringing everyone on this Jira journey of using Jira as a graph database, which is super weird. And what we started to do is actually capture vulnerabilities. I'm using vulnerabilities and threats a bit interchangeably here against those IT assets, so I can start to quantify the amount of information, with the idea that I can start to capture characteristics too, so I can get to a point where I can do a Jira query for a certain characteristic and get a whole load of threats back. It was important for me to separate out threats and vulnerabilities. The threat being and again, I'm using these words very badly, don't be too annoyed. This is a much better taxonomy. But the idea being for me that I could separate out or effectively sanitize the input somewhat. So again, when teams are running these Jira queries, I can lock down the actual content of the vulnerability, so that not every team, not team A can't see all of team B's problems, but they can get value from the actual threat that was discovered. So SQL injection versus the actual database that was vulnerable to SQL injection, and so on. So I started to think about how this would work for this pre-cognitive world where I can capture those characteristics and spit threats back. And I think, okay, it was great, but what actually happened was this. And this is, I'm taking some liberties here because this is some other data that we've pulled back in on all of our threats and risks and vulnerabilities and assets. But what happened was I put too much data in, right? So I had this dream of what it would look like, but I was still pulling in way too much information. And it was still, there's this law called Miller's Law that you may know about or may not. And the idea is that you should really only have 5 ± 2 boxes on a diagram. I definitely broke it here. But what I was trying to do was talk about a threat landscape. I think what I actually did was almost give everyone a heart attack. So I was like, I'll try a couple of other things. And it just didn't, I was like, I'll try a different type of graph. And it just still didn't work. And when you talk to our CISO, he gets really excited about this. And for me, I'm trying to send a message and I'm trying to have a conversation with our engineers about why it's important to fix certain things and actually why sometimes acceptance might be the right thing for now. Because we need to prioritize our efforts, and I have to be cognizant that they've only got so much responsibility or so much time to fix things. And CISO gets incredibly passionate about the graphs and diagrams, but for me, I was like, this doesn't quite send the right message about what we're trying to fix. And in my head, what I wanted to do was do a much smaller diagram. So I effectively got basic results. I got basic data and basic results. And I also, a lot of those threats in that previous picture, not even viable really to my application. So I'm pulling in way too much stuff. It's like querying the CV database for WordPress, which by the way is a fun thing to do if you want to put someone off using WordPress. I think there's like 1,746 responses at the moment for WordPress in the CV database. But if you were actually building in WordPress, not all of those things are applicable to what you're building. And that's what I had here. I had a whole load of false positives, and I'm turning developers off to the conversation that I'm trying to have, which is threat modeling is cool, and I'm trying to automate it for you so you can get some really useful stuff. And what I really wanted to create was something way more simple. So I thought about taking a redirect, and this was, how do I actually go back to the problem I'm having and what I want to do? And I started to think about it in terms of impact. When I want to do predictive threat modeling and I want to have this conversation with engineers, what I'm building, what impact do I truly want it to have, and who do I want that impact for? So I started to think about, well, I need to have, and at Photobox, you may have heard him speak before, we have a whole lot of different brands, right? So when I talk about the impact I want to have impacts for our teams, for Team A versus Team B, but I also need to think about Photobox versus Moonpig versus Huffman and Greets and Poster. So, and then I have group impact, which is how do I support all of those teams in one flow? And then me being me, I want to think about how do I open source this so that I can get feedback too? So what's that industry impact? So I took a step back and I thought about my project and I thought, okay, how do I create a world where I get the feedback from each of these columns from individual team, brand, group, industry? And then how do I make sure I have the impact in the right space? And for me, in the beginning of our AppSec journey at Photobox, I thought I need to have team and group and brand impact as fast as possible. I'm not really narrowing it down, but how do I make sure that at the very least I start showing value to teams, that in turn will show value to their brands, which in turn will send value to the group? So how do I do that quickly? So I started to reuse the data, and that was I had to decide what was relevant. So this was really hard. This is when I do a threat model, I started to look at the patterns in the threats I was getting back. So what threats were repeating across our teams and our brands and our groups. And then I started to think about, well, who is our threat actor? So who is actually targeting our brands and who's likely to target us? So I started to think about the type of exploits and the type of threats that they would go for. And then I started to think about, well, when we look at things like CVEs, I'm not going to pull in all of them, but I should be really cognizant of new ones. We have a bounty program too. And quite often, some of our submissions reflect the latest CVs that have been released because people are trying to try them as soon as that code is available because they want to get you for all the money they can get you for. So I started to think about how do I pull them in. And this graph is hugely different to the first one, but it's too small now. For me, that's not all the threats viable for a Postgres database, right? But it started to make me think about this is much easier to consume and much easier to get back in a Slack result, right? Which is, hey, Slack, GSBot, give me all the threats related to Postgres. This is a much easier to consume model. So I started thinking about, well, how do I use that data? And the biggest one for me was fixes. When we look at this graph, I can start to see, well, some of these fixes might fix 2 of the threats versus a fix that only fixes 1. And then you can start to think about prioritization and the likelihood and impact of a vulnerability or a threat. So I started to think about how can I use this to help prioritize the workload. And one of the things that we had a problem with was we would keep putting security fixes on teams' backlog, but we wouldn't really help them understand, well, if you've got all these security fixes and they all fix critical issues, which one do you go after first? And what we weren't doing really was quantifying, hey, if you did that 3rd one on your list, that actually fixes like 2 criticals and like 5 mediums and all of this other stuff as well. And we weren't really bringing them on the journey. So it gave me a chance to think, well, I'm limited in numbers, they're limited in numbers, how can I speed this up? Great stuff. Still not quite getting to my predictive threat modeling world, but I was starting to have impact fast. And what that impact allowed me to do was take a step back and spend a bit more time on that predictive side. I started to look at how we can use that data to do risk maps. Now, this isn't my work. This is back to the wider team, the Photobox Group Security team, which are doing some super cool stuff. And what we did is start to take all that data that we're capturing on threats, And we were able to start to quantify areas for brands and for teams. So we're starting to show impact at a higher level for the leadership level and that management level, which is, hey, based on all those threats that we're starting to pull in, and this is all created via our Slack bot, which is super cool, we're starting to say, hey, this is where you are in this area, or you've got a load of threats related to this. And we can start to give them kind of that maturity level. And one of the things that we used it for earlier this year was, if you give us this amount of money for the next budget year, we'll get you to this level, which is a little bit cheeky for me because I always feel like it's super subjective. But actually, it was a really great way to start to quantify the conversation of how do we use the resources we've got, and for you as an engineering team, what do you actually get from that money? So when I think about my retrospective threat modeling and how we're doing that, I start to think about, well, how do I take it to the next level? So how do I move it on? And I started thinking about, well, what areas of threat modeling are a little bit hard for me to quantify? And one of them was attack trees. For some reason, I've never really got behind attack trees. And these are, I've always felt like that's more for the incident response team. And it's just been a real struggle for me. But when I think about predictive threat modeling, one of the things that we're really doing it for is to get there before the attackers do, right? Is to make sure we're there pre-incident. So I thought about using attack trees in reverse. So it's this idea that whilst we're doing threat models all of the time and we're hopefully creating at least mental attack trees to come up with threats for our service, so what can go wrong? Okay, well, you might try and go down this avenue and create this attack and get this response back. I started to think about, well, every time we have an incident, that's a threat that we've missed, or it's a threat that we've accepted or fixed badly. So how do we take that data and evolve our threat model? And it was something that I realized that we're never doing, which is we're not evolving our threat models based on every incident. I started to think about, well, when you have an incident, you also only look at, often in your PIRs or your post-incident reviews, your root cause analysis, often you only look at the fix for the specific exploit that occurred for your incident, not, hey, this is an opportunity to look at all the other things that could have caused that value to be lost. So I think back to Tim, and Tim proposing at an airport, or rather luckily not having to propose at an airport. I think about airport security and you think, okay, what are all the things that could go wrong here? So if Tim had to propose at the airport, or if you think about an incident that you've seen in your company, malware on a machine, often we look at the specific thing that failed that allowed that malware to be there. So someone might be very inclined to go with, okay, it was a phishing attack and someone clicked on a link and they downloaded that software. That's not the only thing that failed. And if you only look at that in your incident response and you only then go, okay, well, we'll do some more education around phishing. Well, realistically, that's not the only thing that could have mitigated that. It's not the only thing that was missing. So I go back to this idea of attack trees and I think, well, when I want to get to this predictive threat modeling space, one of the things that I can start to feed in is actual data on our incidents. So I'm talking about now, how do I get more relevant data into these threat models every time? And I start to think, okay, let's reverse engineer this a bit. So one of the things that we're starting to do is each time I have an incident, a security-related incident, as I take a moment, I take a step back and I say, what are all the things that could have caused this? One of the things it's really helped us for is when you first experience an incident and you're not yet sure what's causing it, if that's ever occurred to you, it's quite scary when there's few times it happens. Threat modeling is a great way to do a really quick analysis whilst you're waiting for the relevant team to search through logs or whatever it is they need to do. It's a great way to help to guide that search. So what we've done before is we've had an incident and taken a moment whilst the SOC team or whoever are doing their piece, sit down and think, okay, what are all the ways that could have caused this to happen? And you start to use it to guide that search to speed it up. And then you can think, okay, well, we've started to narrow down what happened based on the log information that we have through our SIEM tour or whatever. But actually, hey, we've got these other pieces of areas too that could have also contributed to that incident. Let's just validate whether they're possible or not. And then what we start to do to take that one step further is write a test for it. So what I mean is every time we've come up with a viable threat vector and we've fixed it or accepted it, is to write a security test. So it's a BDD test or a TDD test, and the idea is that you're continually validating whether that threat is still fixed or that the threat is still viable for your infrastructure. Because one of the things I found is sometimes teams accept a vulnerability or a product owner accepts a risk, but actually that risk might not even be viable in a few weeks' time because that feature has been characteristic's been removed or something's been fixed or it's just no longer viable. And equally, we fix something, and I don't know how many times you guys have seen this, but I've certainly seen it over the last few years, is we fix something and then reintroduced it in the next build. And it's very frustrating because often it's then a year until it's found again. So writing these security tests based on our attack trees from incidents or based on the threat models that we do is a good way to continually validate whether our state of play is true or not. And it's another great way for me to build up that data on the predictive side. So I'll be super honest with you. When I think about my retrospective threat modeling and I think about predictive threat modeling, I'm still not there. So we're starting to capture that data and we're starting to be able to feed that into Jira so that our OS bot can query it and give back some great responses. But I'm still not in my place of pulling in an IT asset and generating all those threats. And as I get closer to it, I still get hung up by the fact that Jira is one of the foundational pieces for it because it's not open source, it's a proprietary tool. And one of the key pieces about what I'm doing is how do I create a way of open sourcing this information, and how do I create a way of integrating with things like MITRE and the attack framework and OS Top 10 and all of those things that are out there to create actually relevant threats for teams. So we're still working on a project. There's a couple of projects that you can contribute to if this is something that interests you, or you just feel like, hey, if I contribute, maybe she'll stop talking about threat modeling for a while. There's an OS threat modeling project. Now this is focused on the security tests, the validation of threats, whether they're present or not. And then the really exciting one, which I'm being a little bit cheeky on because it's not been actually announced